Montana Territory, 1878. The raw edge of the American frontier still cut deep into the wilderness, where men were measured by their grit and women by their endurance. While the country had begun to heal from the wounds of civil war, the Western Territories remained untamed, a place where second chances came at the price of hard work and harder choices. Ethan Ingram believed the frontier was no place for tender feelings. At 25, he'd already weathered enough storms to know that sentiment was a luxury the West couldn't afford. The son of a Texas Ranger who died with his boots on, Ethan had learned early that attachment only led to heartbreak. Better to focus on what could be controlled: cattle, land, and a good horse beneath you. The early June sun beat down on his tanned face as he adjusted his cream-colored Stetson, squinting at the distant figures approaching his modest ranch. 3 riders moving fast. Nothing good ever came at that speed. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip as he stood on the porch of the main house, legs braced shoulder-width apart. His ranch, the Broken Arrow, wasn't much compared to some of the cattle operations spreading across Montana Territory. Just 800 acres, a decent herd, and a dream built from calloused hands and stubborn determination. At 25, most considered him young to run his own spread, but 5 years of saving every penny from his cowhand days had finally paid off last autumn when he'd put down roots 20 miles outside of Willow Creek. "Trouble coming," muttered Jacob, his foreman and only full-time help aside from a cook. The older man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Looks that way," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the unease churning in his gut. In this untamed country, unexpected visitors usually meant problems: rustlers, lawmen with bad news, or neighbors with grievances. But as the riders drew closer, Ethan's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. The lead horse carried Sheriff Grant Parker, a fair man who'd helped Ethan navigate the paperwork of establishing his claim. Behind him rode Dr. Thomas Wells, whose services Ethan had required only once when a young steer had gored him in the leg last winter. The third rider, however, gave him pause. A woman clinging to the saddle as though she might fall at any moment. Even from a distance, he could see she wore a proper dress, now dusty and disheveled from hard riding. Not a local ranch wife, then. "Ethan," the sheriff called as they approached the yard, "got a situation needs sorting." Ethan stepped forward, offering a brief nod to the lawman before his attention fixed on the woman. She couldn't have been more than 20, with golden hair falling in loose waves from what had once been a tidy arrangement. Her dress, though travel-stained, was clearly of fine quality, pale blue with delicate embroidery at the collar. But it was her eyes that caught him most, wide, the color of summer sky, and filled with a mixture of fear and defiance that stirred something inside him. "Sheriff," Ethan acknowledged. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Parker dismounted with a grunt, helping the young woman down from her horse with surprising gentleness. Up close, Ethan could see her face was bruised, a purple mark blooming across her left cheekbone. "This here is Miss Madeline Garrison," Parker said. "She arrived on yesterday's train from Boston, supposed to join her uncle's household in town." The doctor stepped forward. "That's George Garrison's place. You might know him, owns the bank and half the businesses in Willow Creek." Ethan nodded. Everyone knew Garrison. The man had a reputation for ruthless business practices and high-minded ideas about propriety. Not someone Ethan had much cause to deal with, preferring to handle his modest banking needs with the smaller outfit run by the Mayer family. "Miss Garrison has found herself in an unfortunate situation," the sheriff continued, his weathered face grave. "Her uncle has refused to take her in." The young woman lifted her chin slightly. "He said I brought shame to the family name," she said, her voice soft but steady, Eastern accent pronounced against the sheriff's Western drawl. "That I was no better than I ought to be." "Miss Garrison is in a delicate condition," Dr. Wells explained carefully, using the euphemism for pregnancy with significant emphasis. Understanding dawned on Ethan, along with a wave of disgust at the sort of man who would turn away his own blood, especially a young woman in need. But what did this have to do with him? "I'm sorry for your troubles, ma'am," he said, removing his hat respectfully, but I don't quite see." "We've tried every respectable house in town," Sheriff Parker interrupted. "The pastor's wife, the schoolmarm, even the widow Johnson. None will take her in. Her condition, well, folks are particular about such matters. And my uncle has made it clear what would happen to anyone who defied him by offering me shelter," Madeline added, a flash of anger breaking through her composed exterior. "He controls too many mortgages in town for anyone to risk his displeasure." Ethan frowned. "I still don't understand why you've brought her here." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "We're running out of options, Ethan. The only place left would be Madame Rose's establishment, and I can't in good conscience." "No," Ethan said firmly, understanding immediately. The brothel was no place for a pregnant young woman, regardless of her circumstances. "But surely there must be someone else." "You've got that cabin," Dr. Wells interjected, "the one your former hand lived in before moving to Idaho. It's standing empty, and you mentioned needing help with the household since Martha quit to get married." Ethan stared at them in disbelief. They wanted him to take in a pregnant, unmarried Eastern woman of good family. Him, a bachelor rancher barely established, the idea was preposterous. "This is highly irregular," he protested. "These are irregular times," the sheriff countered. "Look, it needn't be permanent. Just until we can arrange passage somewhere else. San Francisco, perhaps, where she might find work or assistance from a ladies' aid society." Madeline Garrison stepped forward then, her gaze direct despite the vulnerability of her position. "Mr. Ingram, I understand this is an imposition. I don't ask for charity. I can cook, clean, manage a household. I was educated at Miss Porter's School for Young Ladies in Connecticut. I can earn my keep until—" her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, still flat beneath her corset, "until other arrangements can be made." Something in her dignity, her refusal to crumble under circumstances that would break many, resonated with Ethan. Still, taking her in would invite gossip, complications he didn't need while trying to establish his ranch. "It's not proper," he said finally. "A single woman living on a bachelor's property, even in a separate cabin, would damage both our reputations." "More than being turned out by her own family?" Dr. Wells asked quietly. "More than being forced into Madame Rose's care. The girl has nowhere else, Ethan." Silence fell over the yard. Jacob had disappeared tactfully into the barn. A meadowlark called from a nearby fence post. Ethan looked at the young woman, scarcely more than a girl really, standing straight back despite the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Against his better judgment, against everything he believed about keeping life simple and uncomplicated by emotional entanglements, Ethan found himself nodding. "The cabin needs work," he said gruffly. "But it's weather-tight with a good stove. You can stay until we find a better solution, Miss Garrison." Relief washed over her face, and for a moment Ethan thought she might weep. Instead, she extended her hand with formal politeness. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram. I promise I won't be a burden." As he took her small, gloved hand in his calloused one, Ethan had the unsettling feeling that his carefully ordered existence had just been irrevocably altered. "Jacob," he called. "Fetch clean linens for the north cabin." Sheriff Parker clapped him on the shoulder. "You're doing a Christian thing here, Ethan." "I'm doing a foolish thing," he corrected. "But I won't have it said that Ethan Ingram turned away someone in need." As Dr. Wells helped Madeline gather her single carpetbag from the horse, Ethan heard himself adding, "You'll always have a place with me, Miss Garrison. At least until we sort this out." Words spoken on impulse, yet they hung in the air with unexpected weight as the young woman turned to him with the first genuine smile he'd seen cross her bruised face. Something shifted in Ethan's chest, a sensation he promptly ignored. This arrangement was temporary, practical, nothing more. He couldn't have been more wrong. The first week passed in awkward coexistence. Ethan made certain Madeline had everything necessary for basic comfort in the cabin, which sat a respectable 300 yards from the main house. He instructed his cook, an elderly Chinese man named Chen who had followed him from his cowhand days, to prepare extra food for her. Beyond that he kept his distance, riding out early and returning late, avoiding any situation that might force prolonged conversation. For her part, Madeline seemed to respect his desire for space. She kept to herself, venturing out mainly to collect the meals Chen brought to her door. Occasionally, Ethan glimpsed her sitting on the small porch of the cabin, reading or simply watching the distant mountains as the summer sun sank behind them. On the 8th day, however, he returned from checking the north pasture to find her in his kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she kneaded dough beside a bemused-looking Chen. "Miss Garrison," he said, removing his hat as he entered, "is something wrong with your cabin?" "Not at all," she replied, brushing a strand of golden hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "But I can't continue to accept your hospitality without contributing. Mr. Chen has kindly agreed to let me assist with the baking." Chen nodded, a rare smile crinkling his weathered face. "Miss make good bread." "Light hands." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Having her in the main house complicated things, blurring the careful boundaries he'd established. Yet he couldn't reasonably object to her desire to be useful. "That's thoughtful of you," he managed. "I thought perhaps we might discuss other ways I could earn my keep," Madeline continued, her attention returning to the dough. "Your accounts perhaps. I noticed ledgers in your study that seem rather haphazardly maintained." Ethan bristled. "My accounts are perfectly adequate." "Of course," she replied diplomatically, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. "I simply thought with my education—" "Miss Garrison," Ethan interrupted, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, I have systems in place that work for me." She looked up then, meeting his gaze directly. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a yellowish smudge, making her blue eyes seem even more vivid by contrast. "Mr. Ingram, I understand your reluctance to disrupt your routine. But I cannot simply exist here as an object of charity. My father—" She stopped abruptly, pain flashing across her features before she composed herself. "My father always said idleness is the devil's playground." Something in her determination struck Ethan. He remembered all too well the pride that came with earning one's way, the desire to be valued for contribution rather than pitied. Wasn't that why he'd left Texas at 17, determined to build something of his own instead of living on the fading glory of his father's name? "You can examine the ledgers," he conceded. "But I make the final decisions about any changes." Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Of course, thank you." That evening, Ethan found himself sharing the dinner table with Madeline for the first time. He'd invited her to join them properly, rather than eating alone in the cabin. If she was going to work on his accounts, they would need to establish some civility beyond awkward encounters. "May I ask you something, Mr. Ingram?" she ventured as Chen served a simple but hearty stew. "You may ask, I might not answer." A flash of amusement crossed her face. "Fair enough. I was wondering why a man your age has established a ranch alone without family. It seems an enormous undertaking." Ethan considered deflecting but found himself answering honestly. "My father died when I was 16. My mother had passed years before. There was nothing keeping me in Texas, and I'd heard Montana Territory had opportunities for those willing to work hard." "So you came all this way alone?" He nodded, worked as a cowhand for 8 years, saved every penny. Bought this place last fall when the previous owner decided mining in Idaho looked more promising than ranching. "That's remarkably brave," she said quietly. "Not brave, necessary." Ethan shifted the conversation away from himself. "And you, Miss Garrison, what brought you west from Boston?" Her hands stilled on her spoon. "Necessity as well, though of a different sort." She hesitated, then continued with careful dignity. "I suppose you've wondered about my condition." In truth, Ethan had wondered, though he'd never have asked directly. Such matters weren't spoken of in polite company, yet the circumstances that had landed her on his doorstep made some explanation inevitable. "My parents died in a carriage accident last winter," she continued. "I was left in the care of a family friend while the estate was settled. This man, a respected physician who had attended our family for years, offered comfort that became something else." Her cheeks flushed, but she continued steadily. When I discovered my condition, he denied everything, said I was trying to trap him into marriage. His wife believed him, of course. I was dismissed as a hysterical, immoral girl. Anger sparked in Ethan's chest at the injustice. And your uncle in Willow Creek was your only remaining family. Yes, I wrote to him, carefully explaining that I would require temporary assistance until I could establish myself as a teacher or governess somewhere discreet. His reply was a train ticket and promise of help. Her laugh held no humor. You saw how that ended. With a bruised face and nowhere to go, Ethan said grimly. Madeline touched her cheek unconsciously. He was rather shocked to see my condition in person. Apparently my letter was not explicit enough. He said I had tricked him, that he would never harbor a fallen woman who would contaminate his household. Her voice remained steady, but Ethan saw the hurt beneath her composure. His wife simply watched as he struck me. Then the sheriff was called to remove me from the premises. The simple cruelty of it tightened Ethan's jaw. Whatever mistakes this young woman had made, she deserved better than abandonment and violence. Your uncle sounds like he could use a lesson in Christian charity, he said finally. Among other things, she agreed, a spark of spirit returning to her eyes. But enough about unpleasant matters. Tell me about your cattle operation. I noticed you run a mixed herd rather than specializing. Surprised by her interest, Ethan found himself explaining his breeding program, the balance he sought between hardier Longhorn stock and the beefier Herefords that were becoming popular. Madeline asked intelligent questions that revealed she'd been observing more than he'd realized during her short time at the ranch. As they continued talking, something eased in Ethan's chest, a tension he hadn't recognized until it began to release. For the first time since her arrival, he saw Madeline Garrison not as an obligation or a complication, but as a person, intelligent, resilient, and far more complex than he'd initially judged. That night, lying in his bed, Ethan reminded himself sternly that her presence was temporary. The doctor would eventually help arrange her passage to San Francisco or perhaps Denver, where she could find the fresh start she sought. His responsibility extended only to providing safe harbor until then. Yet as sleep claimed him, he found himself wondering what color eyes her child would have, and whether they would hold the same quiet determination as their mother's. July unfurled across the Montana landscape in waves of green that would soon turn golden under the relentless summer sun. With each passing day, Madeline's presence at Broken Arrow Ranch became less an aberration and more a natural part of its rhythm. True to her word, she proved herself useful. Beyond the baking that had first brought her into the main house, she transformed Ethan's chaotic account books into models of organization. She took over correspondence with cattle buyers and supply merchants, her elegant handwriting and proper grammar presenting a more professional face for the growing operation than Ethan's blunt scrawl ever had. When she discovered that neither Jacob nor Chen could read English well, she began evening lessons at the kitchen table, her patience never wavering as the men laboriously worked through simple texts she'd found in Ethan's modest bookshelf. You don't need to take on so much, Ethan told her one evening, finding her mending shirts long after the others had retired. Her condition remained barely visible, disguised by the loose work dresses she'd fashioned from fabric purchased during her one cautious trip into town with Dr. Wells. I prefer keeping busy, she replied, not looking up from her neat stitches. Idle hands and all that. Even so, you should rest, for he gestured vaguely toward her midsection, still uncomfortable directly addressing her pregnancy. A small smile touched her lips. The baby is fine, Mr. Ingram. Women have been working while with child since Eve. I'm hardly the delicate hothouse flower my Boston upbringing might suggest. That much was certainly true. Despite her refined manners and education, Madeline had adapted to ranch life with surprising resilience. She never complained about the primitive conditions, the isolation, or the physical demands of her self-appointed tasks. If anything, she seemed to draw strength from proving her capability. At least let me help with that, he said, gesturing to the pile of mending. My hands aren't as nimble as yours, but I can manage basic repairs. Surprise flickered across her face. You so. When necessary, a man alone learns to manage or goes around in tatters. She studied him for a moment, then handed him a shirt with a torn sleeve. Very well, Mr. Ingram. Show me these bachelor sewing skills of yours. They worked in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the crackle of the stove and the soft whisper of thread through fabric. Ethan found himself sneaking glances at Madeline's downturned face, noting the concentration in her expression, the way lamplight caught golden highlights in her hair. May I ask you something personal? She said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Ethan tensed slightly but nodded. Why have you never married, a man with his own property, still young reasonably? She paused, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Presentable, surely there have been opportunities. The question caught him off guard. It had been years since anyone had asked about his bachelor status, most locals having accepted it as simply part of who Ethan Ingram was. Never saw the point, he said finally. The frontier's a hard place. Seen too many men bury wives who couldn't survive the hardships, or women left widowed when their husbands died working dangerous land. Seems kinder to spare someone that fate. Madeline considered this, so you avoid attachment to prevent pain. Put so plainly, it sounded like cowardice rather than the wisdom Ethan had always considered it. I'd call it practical, he defended. This country doesn't favor sentiment. Yet people still fall in love, marry, have children, she observed, even knowing the risks. Some gamble more freely than others. She set down her mending, looking at him directly. Is it really a gamble, though, or is it simply living? Because avoiding all possibility of loss means avoiding the possibility of joy as well. Her words struck uncomfortably close to truths Ethan preferred not to examine. Philosophy doesn't change reality, Miss Garrison. The West breaks more hearts than it mends. Perhaps, she conceded, but I wonder if that's the land's doing or our own fears. With that, she gathered her completed mending and rose. Good night, Mr. Ingram. Thank you for your help. After she left, Ethan remained at the table, turning her words over in his mind. Had he been practical all these years, or simply afraid? The question nagged at him, opening doors to considerations he'd long kept shut. The following week brought unexpected developments that pushed such introspection aside. A telegram arrived from Sheriff Parker, warning that George Garrison had been making inquiries about his niece's whereabouts. Though the sheriff had been discreet, he cautioned that the banker was persistent and influential. What could he possibly want with me now? Madeline asked when Ethan shared the news. He made his position quite clear when he threw me out. They were riding the eastern boundary of the property, checking fence lines that Jacob had reported damaged. Ethan had been reluctant to bring Madeline along, concerned about her condition, but she'd insisted the fresh air and activity would do her good. Seated side-saddle on a gentle mare, she looked more at ease on horseback than he'd expected from an Eastern woman. Men like your uncle care about appearances, Ethan replied, scanning the horizon habitually for signs of trouble. Having family living in questionable circumstances reflects poorly on him. He might have decided it's better to control your situation than have you beyond his influence. Control, she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. That's all it ever is with men like George Garrison or Dr. Franklin in Boston. She straightened her shoulders. I won't go back. I'd rather take my chances alone than submit to his authority. No one's sending you anywhere you don't want to go, Ethan assured her. But we should be cautious. Your uncle has connections beyond Willow Creek. They rode in silence for a time, Ethan pointing out landmarks and explaining the natural boundaries of his property. Despite the worrying news, he found himself enjoying showing Madeline the land he'd worked so hard to acquire. She listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about water rights and grazing rotation that few women, or men for that matter, would have considered. You have a good eye for terrain, he observed as they crested a small rise overlooking a meadow where a portion of his herd grazed. Most people see only pretty views, not practical considerations. My father was interested in landscape architecture, she explained. He taught me to observe how land works, not just how it looks, though I admit this view has beauty as well as function. The late afternoon sun bathed the scene in golden light, the cattle dark shapes against vibrant green grass. Beyond, the mountains rose in purple majesty, their peaks still snow-capped even in summer. It was the vista that had convinced Ethan to purchase this particular property, a daily reminder of why he'd chosen this hard but free existence. "It does at that," he agreed, allowing himself a rare moment of appreciation. As they turned their horses homeward, Ethan noticed Madeline shift uncomfortably in her saddle. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "The ride's not too much." "Just a twinge," she assured him. "The baby moves sometimes, reminding me of its presence." The casual mention of the child growing within her still unsettled Ethan, though less than it once had. Over the past weeks, he'd become accustomed to Madeline's matter-of-fact approach to her condition. She neither flaunted it nor treated it with shame, simply as a reality to be managed alongside life's other challenges. "Do you ever," he began, then hesitated, unsure if the question was too personal. "Do I ever what?" she prompted. "Do you ever regret trusting the man who did this to you, the doctor in Boston?" Her expression grew thoughtful. "I regret my naivety, certainly. I regret believing that his position and our family's long acquaintance guaranteed his honor." She rested a hand lightly on her stomach. "But I don't regret this child. Whatever circumstances led to its creation, it's innocent, and mine." Her quiet certainty impressed Ethan. Many women would have been crushed by such betrayal, such complete upending of their lives and prospects. Yet Madeline faced her future with a steadiness that spoke of deeper strength than her delicate appearance suggested. "You're a remarkable woman, Miss Garrison," he said before he could reconsider the words. A smile touched her lips, genuine but tinged with sadness. "Not remarkable, simply adapting, as women have always done when men's choices leave us with consequences to bear." The bitter truth of her statement hung between them as they rode the final distance to the ranch, in contemplative silence. That night brought an unexpected visitor. Ethan was reviewing cattle sale contracts Madeline had organized when hoofbeats approached the main house. Instinctively, he reached for the rifle mounted above the door before stepping onto the porch. "Identify yourself," he called into the gathering dusk. "It's Wells," came the reply. "Dr. Wells from town." Ethan relaxed slightly, but kept the rifle in hand as the doctor rode into the yard. His horse was lathered, suggesting a hard, fast ride. "Everything all right, Doc?" Ethan asked as the older man dismounted stiffly. "Where's Miss Garrison?" Wells asked without preamble, his usually jovial face grim. "In her cabin, I expect. What's happened?" "George Garrison has filed papers claiming his niece is mentally unstable and unable to make sound decisions. He's petitioning for guardianship on grounds of protecting both her and the family name." Cold anger washed through Ethan. "That's absurd. Miss Garrison is perfectly sound of mind." "You and I know that," the doctor agreed, following Ethan inside. "But Garrison has two physicians from Helena willing to testify that her pregnancy has caused a condition they're calling maternal hysteria. It's nonsense, of course, but with his money and connections." "He could win," Ethan finished. "And then what? Lock her away somewhere until after the birth, then take the child and dispose of her however suits him best." "Most likely." Wells accepted the whiskey Ethan poured with a grateful nod. "The sheriff's delaying service of the papers, but Garrison's hired men are asking questions around town. It won't be long before they track her here." Ethan paced the room, mind working through options. She could leave, head to Denver or San Francisco ahead of schedule. Alone, nearly 5 months with child, the journey would be dangerous even with companions. The doctor shook his head. And Garrison would simply follow. A man of his means can pursue a legal claim anywhere in the territory, possibly beyond. "Then what do you suggest?" Ethan demanded, frustration sharpening his tone. Dr. Wells studied him over the rim of his glass. "There's one solution that would supersede his guardianship claim immediately." "Which is?" "Marriage," the doctor said bluntly. A husband's legal rights trump an uncle's in every jurisdiction. If Miss Garrison were a married woman, George Garrison's petition would be meaningless. Ethan, stop pacing. You can't be serious. Perfectly serious. It needn't be a real marriage in the fullest sense, merely a legal arrangement for her protection. After the child comes and Garrison loses interest, you could quietly obtain an annulment if desired. Ethan struggled to articulate the sheer impossibility of what Wells proposed. Miss Garrison would never agree to such a scheme, and I have no intention of marrying, even in name only. The doctor set down his glass with a sharp click against the table. Then prepare to watch her dragged away by Garrison's men, committed to an asylum on false pretenses and separated from her child, because that's what awaits her otherwise. The stark reality of the threat silenced Ethan's objections. He thought of Madeline's quiet dignity, her determination to forge a path forward despite everything aligned against her. The idea of her confined, her will broken by institutional cruelty, was unbearable. "Let me think," he said finally, "and we should speak with Miss Garrison. This concerns her future more than anyone's." When informed of her uncle's maneuvers, Madeline received the news with remarkable composure, though her face paled visibly. "I suspected he might try something of this nature," she said, seated at Ethan's kitchen table where they had gathered for this urgent discussion. "He cannot abide loose ends or situations beyond his control." "The marriage solution is merely one option," Ethan hastened to add, uncomfortable with how Dr. Wells had presented it as the only viable choice. Madeline's clear blue eyes met his. "Is it? What alternatives do we realistically have, Mr. Ingram?" Her directness caught him off guard. He had expected protest, outrage at the suggestion, not this calm assessment. "You could travel to another territory," he suggested, "or we could fight the guardianship claim in court." "With what resources? Against my uncle's influence and money," she shook her head. "And travel in my condition, alone, with no connections or support waiting at the other end. That's hardly promising." Dr. Wells cleared his throat. "There are other men in the territory who might be willing to enter such an arrangement. Widowers with children who need care, older men seeking companionship." "No," Ethan interrupted, surprising himself with the vehemence of his objection. The thought of Madeline married off to some stranger, potentially someone who might mistreat her or the child, was suddenly intolerable. "If this is truly the only solution, I'll do it." Silence fell over the kitchen. Madeline studied him with an unreadable expression. "You've already done so much, Mr. Ingram," she said finally. "I couldn't ask for more." "You're not asking." "I'm offering." Ethan straightened in his chair, commitment replacing uncertainty as he spoke. "It would be a marriage in name only, as Dr. Wells suggested, an arrangement of mutual convenience and protection. Once the child is born and your uncle's interest wanes, you would be free to pursue whatever future you wish." A complicated emotion flickered across Madeline's face. "And you would be tied to a wife and another man's child, even temporarily. Your reputation." "My reputation can withstand more than yours in this territory," he said simply. "And I've never much cared what others think." Dr. Wells, observing their exchange with keen eyes, rose from the table. "I'll give you two some privacy to discuss details, but may I suggest that whatever you decide, you act quickly. Garrison is not a patient man." After the doctor stepped outside, an awkward silence fell between them. Ethan found himself unable to meet Madeline's gaze directly, suddenly aware of the enormity of what he'd proposed. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly. "Truly." Ethan considered deflecting with practicalities. How she had proven valuable to the ranch's operation, how her accounting skills had already improved his bottom line. But something in her direct question demanded honesty. "Because what your uncle plans is wrong," he said finally. "And because in the short time you've been here, you've shown more courage and dignity than most men I've known in a lifetime. You deserve a chance to determine your own future, not have it dictated by men who see you as property to be controlled." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. That's possibly the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. It's not kindness. It's truth. Uncomfortable with the emotion thick in the air, Ethan shifted to practical matters. If we do this, there would be talk. People would assume the child is mine, that we had to marry in haste. Would that bother you? She asked. He considered it honestly. No, let them talk, but you should understand what you're agreeing to. Life here is hard, isolated. The winters are brutal. This isn't Boston with its society and comforts. A small smile touched her lips. I think I've proven I can adapt to frontier life, Mr. Ingram. Ethan, he corrected. If we're to be husband and wife, even in name only, you should use my given name. Ethan, she repeated, the sound of his name in her voice creating an unexpected warmth in his chest. And I'm Madeline. Madeline, he acknowledged. Then, with awkward formality, do we have an agreement then? She extended her hand across the table. We do, a marriage of convenience, with the understanding that it can be dissolved when my situation is secure. As Ethan took her small hand in his calloused one, he was struck by the solemnity of the moment. A contract formed not from love or passion, but from necessity and mutual respect. Yet it felt more honest than many traditional engagements he'd witnessed. I'll ride into town tomorrow with Dr. Wells, he said. We'll arrange for Judge Wilson to perform a civil ceremony as soon as possible. 2 days later, in the sparse front parlor of Judge Wilson's home in Willow Creek, Ethan Ingram and Madeline Garrison exchanged vows without romance or celebration. The sheriff and doctor stood as witnesses. The bride wore her best blue dress, hastily altered to accommodate her changing figure. The groom wore his only suit, stiff with disuse. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Wilson declared, closing his Bible with a snap. Mr. Ingram, you may kiss your bride. Ethan froze, having somehow overlooked this traditional conclusion to even the simplest wedding ceremony. He looked at Madeline, uncertain. Her cheeks colored slightly, but she gave a small nod. Awkwardly, he leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to hers, a dry, chaste gesture that nonetheless sent an unexpected jolt through him. Her lips were soft, her scent a subtle floral that reminded him of spring meadows. He pulled away quickly, unsettled by his reaction. Congratulations, Sheriff Parker said, shaking Ethan's hand firmly. Best of luck to you both. As they left the judge's house, Ethan noticed George Garrison watching from across the street, his face darkened with fury. The banker had learned of their plans too late to stop them. Now, with the marriage legally recorded, his guardianship petition was rendered moot. He doesn't look pleased, Madeline observed, following Ethan's gaze. No, he doesn't. Ethan helped her onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. But there's nothing he can do now. You're legally under my protection. She placed her hand lightly on his arm. Thank you, Ethan. I know this wasn't what you planned for your life. He covered her hand with his own briefly. Plans change, Madeline. That's the first rule of survival out west. As they drove out of town, Ethan was acutely aware of the gold band now encircling the third finger of his left hand, a physical reminder of how dramatically his carefully ordered existence had shifted in just a few short weeks. What had begun as a temporary act of charity had somehow transformed into a legal bond that, however temporary its intent, felt weightier than he'd anticipated. The summer weeks that followed brought unexpected adjustments to life at Broken Arrow Ranch. Despite their agreement that the marriage was merely a legal arrangement, certain practicalities required addressing. After much discussion, Madeline moved from the cabin into the main house, taking the small bedroom that had previously served as Ethan's study. People will talk if a newly married couple lives in separate dwellings, she'd reasoned. And your uncle might use such arrangements to question the validity of our marriage. Ethan had conceded the point, though having her presence in his home, the soft sounds of her movements in the adjacent room, the scent of lavender that seemed to follow her, created a constant awareness he found difficult to ignore. Their daily routines shifted to accommodate their new status. They took meals together, discussed ranch business as partners rather than benefactor and guest, and presented a united front to the occasional visitor. If Jacob or Chen found anything odd in the sudden marriage, neither man commented directly, though Ethan sometimes caught knowing glances between them. August arrived with scorching heat that wilted even the hardiest prairie grasses. Madeline's condition became more pronounced, her slender frame now clearly showing the rounded evidence of the child she carried. Dr. Wells visited regularly, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy despite the challenging circumstances. "You're doing remarkably well," he told Madeline during one such visit, while Ethan waited awkwardly in the kitchen. "Many women of your background would have collapsed under the strain of such changes." "I've had help," she replied, her gaze moving to Ethan with warm gratitude that made him inexplicably uncomfortable. He didn't deserve such looks, he'd done only what basic decency required. Yet as the weeks passed, Ethan found himself increasingly invested in Madeline's well-being beyond the terms of their arrangement. He noticed when she tired more easily, adjusting her workload without comment. He brought wild strawberries from the high meadows when she mentioned craving something sweet. He found himself watching her as she moved about the house, struck by the quiet grace she maintained despite her advancing pregnancy. These observations troubled him. He'd committed to a marriage of convenience, not emotional entanglement. The arrangement had clear parameters and a defined endpoint. Allowing sentiment to complicate matters would only make the eventual separation more difficult. Such thoughts preoccupied him as he worked the southern pasture one hot afternoon, mending a section of fence damaged in a recent thunderstorm. The repetitive labor of hammering posts usually cleared his mind, but today his thoughts kept circling back to the woman waiting at the ranch house, his wife in name, if nothing else. "You look like a man wrestling with his conscience," came a familiar voice. Ethan looked up to find Sheriff Parker approaching on horseback, his badge glinting in the sunlight. The lawman dismounted with a groan, stretching his back. "Just fixing fence," Ethan replied, driving another nail with perhaps more force than necessary. "Uh-huh," Parker leaned against a post, clearly unconvinced. "How's married life treating you?" "It's not what you think," Ethan said sharply. "It's an arrangement, nothing more." "So you keep saying." The sheriff scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Funny thing about arrangements, though, they have a way of becoming more when good people are involved." Ethan set down his hammer, wiping sweat from his brow. "Did you ride all the way out here to philosophize about my marriage, or was there a purpose to this visit?" "Can it be both?" Parker grinned, then sobered. "Actually, I came with news. George Garrison is leaving Willow Creek, moving his banking operation to Helena permanently. Seems he's decided smaller towns don't offer sufficient opportunities for a man of his ambitions." Relief washed through Ethan. That's good news for Madeline. Without her uncle's presence, she'll face less scrutiny. "Good news for you both," Parker agreed. "But there's more." Before leaving, Garrison made some troubling insinuations to anyone who'd listen, suggesting the hasty marriage might be covering up improprieties, hinting that his niece's child might have a father closer to home than Boston. Ethan's hands clenched around the hammer's handle. "He's implying the child is mine, that Madeline and I. That you two were involved before she ever left Boston, yes. It's nonsense, of course, given the timeline, but gossip doesn't concern itself with facts." "Does Madeline know about this?" Parker shook his head. "I came to you first, thought you should decide how much to share with her given her condition." Ethan considered the implications. The rumors would eventually reach them, regardless. Madeline had already faced worse than malicious gossip, but in her advancing pregnancy, any additional stress concerned him. "I'll handle it," he said finally. "Thank you for the warning." After the sheriff departed, Ethan completed the fence repairs mechanically, his mind churning with this new development. Part of him burned to confront Garrison, to defend Madeline's honor. But the banker would be gone before he could reach town, and creating a public scene would only lend credence to the rumors. By the time he returned to the ranch house, dusk was settling over the land. He found Madeline on the porch, reading by the last of the daylight. She looked up as he approached, her smile of greeting faltering as she registered his expression. "Something's happened," she said, setting aside her book. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated, then decided honesty was the only reasonable course. As he related Sheriff Parker's news, he watched her face carefully, prepared for distress or anger. Instead, after the initial shock, a strange calm settled over her features. "I should have expected this," she said when he finished. "My uncle is not a man to accept defeat graciously." "You don't seem upset," Ethan observed, taking the chair beside her. "Oh, I am," she assured him. "But I've learned that anger changes nothing, and in truth there's a certain freedom in having nothing left to lose. My reputation was compromised the moment my condition became known. These new rumors hardly matter in comparison." Her resilience continually surprised him. Where many would have crumbled under such consistent assault on their character and dignity, Madeline somehow found strength to move forward. "Still, it's unjust," he said, "to drag your name through the mud, and mine by association." She turned to him, genuine concern in her eyes. "Does it bother you, what people will think of you?" Ethan considered the question. Once perhaps he would have cared more about his standing in the community, but the past months had shifted his perspective in ways he was only beginning to recognize. "No," he said finally. "I've never much concerned myself with others' opinions. What matters is that we know the truth." "And what is the truth, Ethan?" she asked softly. "Not about the rumors, but about us, this arrangement we've made. Is it still what you want?" The question caught him unprepared. Was it still what he wanted? The parameters had seemed so clear at the outset, a temporary solution to a specific problem. Yet something had changed in the weeks since their hasty ceremony. The boundaries he'd established had blurred, his emotional distance eroding day by day. "I made a commitment," he said carefully. "I stand by it." It wasn't a direct answer to her question, and they both knew it. But it was all he could offer while his own understanding remained so uncertain. Madeline accepted his response with a slight nod. "It will be getting cold soon," she said, changing the subject as she gathered her book. "The first frost can't be far off." As she rose to enter the house, Ethan noticed how she braced one hand against her lower back, supporting the weight of her advancing pregnancy. The sight stirred a protectiveness that went beyond their legal arrangement. "Madeline," he said impulsively. She turned, silhouetted in the doorway. "Yes." Words failed him. What did he want to say? That he'd grown to admire her more than he'd thought possible, that her presence had somehow shifted from intrusion to comfort, that the idea of their arrangement ending left him with an emptiness he hadn't anticipated. "Nothing," he said finally. "Just good night." "Good night, Ethan," she replied, disappearing into the house and leaving him alone with thoughts too complicated to unravel. September brought the first hints of autumn, cooler nights, touches of gold in the cottonwood trees along the creek. The ranch's pace quickened as preparations for winter began in earnest. Hay needed cutting and storing, final cattle sales arranged before the snow made driving herds impossible, supplies stockpiled against the long isolation of Montana winters. Amidst this activity, Madeline's pregnancy entered its final stages. Her movements slowed, her body heavy with the child that would arrive before the year's end. Dr. Wells increased his visits to weekly, concerned about her remoteness from medical care when her time came. "Everything looks healthy," he assured them after one examination, "but first births can be unpredictable, if early snowfall blocks the roads." "I've asked Jacob to stay on through winter instead of visiting his family in Oregon," Ethan said. "If we need to fetch you in an emergency, he'll know the fastest routes regardless of weather." The doctor nodded approvingly. "Good thinking, and I've brought more supplies for Mrs. Ingram, tonics for strength, materials for the birth itself." Madeline accepted these preparations with outward calm, though Ethan sometimes caught worry in her eyes when she thought herself unobserved. One evening, finding her staring pensively into the fire, he ventured what had been on his mind for days. "Would you prefer to move into town until after the birth? We could arrange lodgings close to Dr. Wells." "It might be safer." She looked up, surprised by the suggestion. "And leave you alone for weeks. Who would manage the accounts, the correspondence?" "Those things can wait," Your safety and the child's cannot. A soft smile touched her lips. Thank you for the concern, but I'd rather stay here. This has become home in a way no other place has been since my parents died. The simple declaration settled over Ethan like a warm blanket. Home. She considered his ranch his house, their house now home. The thought pleased him more than it should have. Then we'll make sure you have everything you need here, he promised. I've cleared space in the root cellar for emergency supplies. Jacob's wife was a midwife before they married. He knows enough to help if the doctor can't reach us. Her hand found his, squeezing gently. You've thought of everything. Not everything, he admitted, but enough, I hope. That night Ethan lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, listening to the soft sounds of Madeline's movement in the adjacent room. The thin wall between them seemed both barrier and connection, a physical manifestation of the careful distance they maintained despite their legal bond. What would happen after the child was born? Their arrangement had always been presented as temporary, a solution to immediate danger rather than a permanent union. With George Garrison gone and the immediate threat removed, would Madeline still want to leave in spring, seeking the independent life she'd originally planned? The thought created a hollow feeling in Ethan's chest that he wasn't prepared to examine too closely. Better to focus on the immediate challenges: winter preparation, the coming birth, ensuring their safety through the harsh months ahead. The future would sort itself out when the time came. October arrived with an unexpected early snowfall that blanketed the ranch in white. Though it melted within days, the warning was clear: winter would arrive early and hard this year. Ethan doubled his efforts, working from dawn until well after dusk to ensure the ranch was prepared. Returning from a long day of securing the north pasture fence line, he found the house unusually quiet. Chen was in the kitchen preparing dinner, but Madeline was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Mrs. Ingram?" he asked, the formal title still strange on his tongue despite months of marriage. Chen gestured toward the bedroom. "Lady not feel good, say need rest." Concern tightened Ethan's chest. He knocked softly on Madeline's door, entering when she called a weak acknowledgement. She lay atop the quilt, one hand resting on her swollen belly, her face pale. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw him. "I meant to finish the supply inventory, but I felt light-headed after lunch." "The inventory can wait." Ethan moved to her side, awkwardly uncertain whether to sit on the bed or maintain a more proper distance. "What can I do? Should I send for Dr. Wells?" "No, it's nothing serious, just tiredness and some discomfort." She attempted a reassuring smile. "Dr. Wells said to expect this as the time grows closer." "Even so, you should rest more. You've been doing too much." She shook her head slightly. "I need to be useful, Ethan. I can't just sit idle while everyone else works." "You're carrying a child," he pointed out. "That's hardly being idle." A genuine smile touched her lips then. "My mother would have agreed with you. She always said a woman in my condition should be treated like fine china." "Your mother sounds like a sensible woman." She was. Madeline's expression grew wistful. "I wish she could have known her grandchild. She would have loved it regardless of the circumstances." The mention of the child's imminent arrival brought a question Ethan had been avoiding. "Have you thought about names?" She nodded. "Sarah for a girl after my mother, for a boy." She hesitated. "I thought perhaps William after my father, unless you had a preference." The question startled him. "Me, it's not my child." "No, but you'll be the only father figure in its life, at least for a time." She watched him carefully. "Unless that's presuming too much." Ethan had never considered that aspect of their arrangement, that while technically not his child by blood, he would functionally serve as its father for however long their marriage lasted. The realization was both unsettling and strangely affecting. "William is a good name," he said finally. "Strong, traditional." Relief visibly passed through her. "Thank you for everything, Ethan. I don't say it enough, but what you've done for me, for us." "You don't need to thank me," he interrupted, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I've done only what anyone with decency would do." "No," she said firmly. What you've done goes far beyond common decency. Most men would have sent me away rather than risk their reputation and peace. You've given me not just shelter but respect, a chance at dignity. That's rare, Ethan, and precious." Her words created a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the stove. Before he could respond, she winced suddenly, her hand pressing more firmly against her belly. "What is it?" he asked, alarm sharpening his voice. "Just the baby moving," she assured him. "It's been very active today." "Would you," she hesitated, then continued, "would you like to feel it?" The offer caught him completely unprepared. Such intimacy, even of this innocent nature, lay far outside the boundaries they'd established. Yet curiosity and something deeper drew him forward. "If you're certain it's appropriate," he said hesitantly. "We're married, Ethan," she reminded him with gentle humor. "Even if only on paper, I think propriety allows this much." Slowly she took his hand and guided it to the firm curve of her stomach. For a moment, he felt nothing beyond the strange intimacy of touching her this way. Then a distinct movement against his palm, a push or kick from the life growing within. Words failed him as the sensation repeated, stronger this time. "Remarkable, isn't it?" Madeline said softly. "A whole person, complete and separate, yet connected to me in the most fundamental way." Ethan couldn't tear his gaze from where his hand rested against the swell of her belly, feeling the child's movements. Something profound shifted within him, a connection forming to this unborn life that he hadn't sought or expected. "Yes," he managed finally, "remarkable." The moment stretched between them, charged with meanings neither was prepared to articulate. Then Madeline winced again, differently this time. "I should let you rest," Ethan said, withdrawing his hand reluctantly. "Can I bring you anything? Tea, perhaps?" "Tea would be lovely," she agreed. "And maybe some of Chen's bread if there's any left." As he turned to leave, she caught his hand. "Ethan, thank you for not seeing me as just a burden. It means more than I can say." He squeezed her fingers gently before releasing them. "You've never been a burden, Madeline, not for a single day." The truth of those words followed him as he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Somewhere in the month since she'd arrived at his ranch, Madeline Garrison, now Ingram, had transformed from obligation to essential presence. The realization both comforted and terrified him. November descended with ruthless cold, bringing snow that didn't melt and winds that found every crack in the ranch house's weathered walls. Ethan spent days caulking and reinforcing, determined that Madeline and her child would face no additional hardship from the elements. As her time grew nearer, Madeline's energy waned. The last stages of pregnancy confined her largely to the house, though she continued managing what ranch business could be conducted from her chair by the fire. Correspondence, accounts, supply inventories. She insisted on maintaining her usefulness despite Ethan's concerns. "I'm with child, not invalid," she reminded him when he suggested she rest more. "Activity is good for both me and the baby, according to Dr. Wells." The doctor himself visited weekly now, often staying overnight when weather made the return journey to town hazardous. During one such visit, while Madeline rested after her examination, he spoke frankly to Ethan in the kitchen. "The child is positioned well, and she's strong despite her delicate appearance. But first births are unpredictable, as I've said before. We should be prepared for all possibilities." Ethan nodded grimly. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep plenty of clean linens ready. Ensure water can be heated quickly day or night, and prepare yourself mentally, Ethan. Birth is not a tidy or quiet business. She'll need your strength." The doctor studied him thoughtfully. "You've grown quite attached to her, haven't you? Despite your claims about this being merely an arrangement." Ethan stiffened. "She's under my protection. Of course I'm concerned for her welfare." Wells's expression suggested he saw more than Ethan wanted to reveal. "Well, protection is certainly important, but there are different kinds of protection, aren't there? Some physical, some more complicated." Before Ethan could respond to this cryptic observation, Jacob burst into the kitchen, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Ryder's coming," he announced tersely. 3 men moving fast despite the weather. Don't recognize them. Ethan moved immediately to the window, scanning the approaching figures. Strangers during winter, particularly moving with such purpose, rarely brought good news. "Doctor, stay with Madeline," he instructed. "Jacob, fetch the rifles from the gun cabinet." Could be nothing but best to be prepared. By the time the riders reached the yard, Ethan stood on the porch, rifle held casually but visibly across his body. Jacob flanked him, similarly armed. The message was clear. Visitors were welcome, trouble was not. The lead rider, a well-dressed man in his 40s, reined in his horse and removed his hat despite the bitter cold. "Mr. Ingram, Ethan Ingram." "That's me," Ethan confirmed, not lowering his rifle. "What's your business here?" "The name's Franklin, Dr. James Franklin from Boston." The man's Eastern accent matched his fine clothing. "I understand you're harboring a young woman who once was under my care, Madeline Garrison, though I hear she goes by Ingram now." Ice formed in Ethan's veins as understanding dawned. This was the man who had taken advantage of Madeline's vulnerability after her parents' death, the father of her child, who had denied responsibility and cast her out when she needed him most. "My wife is not receiving visitors," Ethan said coldly, emphasizing the word wife deliberately. "Especially not those who have traveled so far without invitation." Franklin's expression hardened. "Your wife? That's a convenient fiction, isn't it? I've spoken with George Garrison in Helena. He was quite forthcoming about the hasty arrangement made to circumvent his guardianship petition." "The marriage is legal and binding," Ethan replied evenly. "Whatever Mr. Garrison may have told you, Madeline is my lawfully wedded wife. Now state your business clearly, or turn around and leave my property." Franklin dismounted despite the unwelcoming reception, signaling his companions to remain on horseback. "I've come to make things right. My position in Boston has become complicated since Madeline left. Rumors persist, questions about her sudden departure. It would be better for all concerned if she returned with me, properly married this time." The audacity of the proposal left Ethan momentarily speechless with rage. This man had destroyed Madeline's reputation, denied his child, and now proposed to make things right only when his own standing was threatened. "Let me understand," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You want me to hand over my wife to you, the same woman you called hysterical and immoral when she came to you with news of her pregnancy." Franklin had the grace to look discomfited. Things were said in haste on both sides. Madeline was distraught after her parents' deaths, possibly confused about circumstances, but I'm prepared to take responsibility now. 7 months too late, Ethan observed. After she's been turned out by her family, forced to seek shelter with strangers, and subjected to public humiliation. Now you want to play the honorable man. I understand your position as her protector has certain financial advantages, Franklin continued smoothly. I'm prepared to compensate you generously for any inconvenience. $5,000 should more than cover any investment you've made in this situation. It took every ounce of Ethan's self-control not to strike the man where he stood. The implication that he'd married Madeline for financial gain, that he could be bought off like a common swindler, burned like acid. "Get off my property," he said, raising the rifle slightly. "Now, before I forget the laws of hospitality." Franklin's face hardened. "Don't be a fool, Ingram. You're a rancher barely scraping by in the wilderness. I'm offering enough money to transform this operation into something substantial. All for releasing a woman who's not truly yours." "She is my wife," Ethan repeated. "In every way that matters, and there's not enough money in Boston to change that fact. Perhaps Madeline should decide for herself." Franklin's gaze moved past Ethan to the doorway behind him. "Isn't that right, my dear?" Ethan turned to find Madeline standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support, the other protectively covering her swollen belly. Her face was pale with shock, her eyes wide as she stared at the man from her past. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what are you doing here?" "Coming to bring you home, of course." Franklin's tone softened, becoming cajoling. "This has gone on long enough, Madeline. Your place is in Boston, not this frontier outpost." Ethan moved protectively to Madeline's side, supporting her elbow. "You don't have to speak to him. Say the word and I'll send him away." She straightened slightly, drawing strength from his presence. "No, I want to hear what he has to say." Franklin approached the porch steps, stopping when Ethan's expression warned him not to come closer. "The situation in Boston has become untenable without you. Questions about your departure, rumors about your condition. My wife has filed for divorce, citing impropriety." "How unfortunate for you," Madeline said, her voice gaining strength. "To face consequences for your actions at last." "I've come to make it right," Franklin insisted. "To give your child my name, to restore your position in society. We can be married as soon as your current arrangement is dissolved." Madeline's laugh held no humor. "Married, now that your reputation is at stake rather than just mine, now that your comfortable life has been disrupted." "I made a mistake," he admitted. "I panicked when you told me about the child. But I'm here now, offering a legitimate future for you both." Ethan felt Madeline's body tense beside him. Her hand found his arm, gripping it for support, physical and otherwise. "You're too late, James," she said clearly. "I have a husband. A man who stood by me when no one else would, who offered protection without demanding anything in return. A man of genuine honor, not the superficial kind that depends on social standing." Franklin's face darkened. "This pretense of a marriage is more real than anything you ever offered me," she interrupted. "Ethan gave me his name, his protection, his respect when I had nothing to give in return. You wouldn't even acknowledge your own child until it became convenient." "Don't be foolish, Madeline," Franklin warned. "Think about the child's future. What can this ranch hand offer compared to a Boston physician's son? Education, opportunity, social position." "Integrity," she countered, "decency. The chance to grow up seeing how a real man conducts himself." Her grip on Ethan's arm tightened. "My answer is no, James. I won't be returning to Boston with you, now or ever." Franklin's expression hardened into something ugly. "You always were stubborn beyond reason. Perhaps when the novelty of playing frontier wife wears off, when you're tired of dirt floors and isolation, you'll reconsider." "My house has proper wooden floors," Ethan said mildly. "And my wife made her position clear. It's time for you to leave." For a tense moment it seemed Franklin might argue further. Then, with a curt nod, he returned to his horse. "You know where to find me if you come to your senses," he said to Madeline. "I'll be in Helena for another week before returning east." Without waiting for a response, he mounted and signaled his companions. The three riders departed as quickly as they'd arrived, disappearing into the swirling snow. As soon as they were out of sight, Madeline's composure crumbled. She sagged against Ethan, trembling. He gathered her carefully against him, supporting her weight. "Let's get you inside," he murmured. "You shouldn't be in this cold." Dr. Wells met them in the doorway, concern evident in his expression. "That was ill-timed excitement you didn't need," he observed, helping guide Madeline to her chair by the fire. "How are you feeling?" "Shaken," she admitted. "I never thought he would follow me here after all this time." "Men like that can't stand losing what they consider theirs," Ethan said grimly, stoking the fire to drive away the chill. "Even when they never truly valued it." "Did you mean what you said," Wells asked Madeline gently, "about not returning to Boston?" "It would offer certain advantages for the child." She looked up at Ethan, her expression resolute despite her pallor. "Every word, I meant every word." Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that transcended their legal arrangement. In that moment, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he could never let her go, not to Boston or anywhere else. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it settled in his chest like a long-missing piece finally sliding into place. "Franklin won't give up easily," he warned. "Men used to getting their way rarely do." "Let him try," Madeline said with surprising fierceness. "I've found my place, Ethan. Right here." The words echoed his own thoughts so precisely that for a moment Ethan wondered if he'd spoken aloud. But no, this was Madeline's choice, made freely and clearly. For the first time since their hasty marriage, he allowed himself to consider that perhaps their arrangement might become something more permanent than either had initially planned. The thought should have sent him retreating into emotional distance. Instead, it filled him with unexpected peace. 2 days after Franklin's unwelcome visit, as the first light of dawn barely illuminated the snow-covered landscape, Ethan awoke to a sound that froze his blood, Madeline crying out in pain from her bedroom. He was at her door in seconds, propriety forgotten as he rushed to her side. She sat upright in bed, face contorted in agony, hands clutching her swollen belly. "The baby," she gasped, "it's coming." Ethan's mind raced. Dr. Wells had returned to town the previous afternoon, confident that Madeline had weeks yet before her time. The heavy snowfall overnight would make fetching him difficult, perhaps impossible. "I'll send Jacob for the doctor," he said, trying to project calm he didn't feel. "How long have you been having pains?" "Since midnight," she admitted. "I thought they were just the practice contractions Dr. Wells mentioned, but they're getting stronger, closer together." Another contraction seized her then, forcing a stifled cry through clenched teeth. Ethan felt utterly helpless watching her pain, knowing he could do nothing to ease it. "Jacob," he called, not taking his eyes from Madeline, "we need the doctor now." The foreman appeared in the doorway, taking in the situation at a glance. "Snow's 3 feet deep and still falling. Trail to town will be nearly impassable." "Try anyway," Ethan ordered. "Take the strongest horse, whatever supplies you need." "We have to get Wells here." As Jacob departed, Ethan turned back to Madeline, who had collapsed against her pillows as the contraction eased. "What can I do?" he asked, desperation evident in his voice. "Water," she whispered. "And clean linens. Dr. Wells left supplies in that chest by the window." For the next hour, Ethan moved with frantic purpose, heating water, arranging linens, positioning the medical supplies within easy reach. Chen appeared with tea and broth, his weathered face solemn with concern. "Old Chen helped many births in China," he offered. "Know what to do if doctor not come." Ethan had never felt more grateful for the elderly cook's presence. "Thank you," he said fervently. "I don't know the first thing about delivering a baby." "Not complicated," Chen assured him with typical understatement. "Women do all hard work. Men just catch." Despite the tension, Madeline managed a weak laugh at this assessment. The sound bolstered Ethan's courage. If she could find humor in this situation, perhaps things weren't as dire as his fears suggested. That hope evaporated with her next contraction, longer, more intense than the previous ones. Madeline couldn't suppress her cry of pain, the sound tearing at Ethan's heart. "Something's wrong," she gasped when she could speak again. "It shouldn't hurt this much, not yet." Dr. Wells said early labor would be gradual. Fear clawed at Ethan's chest. What if there were complications? What if he lost her? The thought was unbearable. "Jacob will bring help," he assured her, taking her hand. "Just hold on." But as the morning wore into afternoon with no sign of Jacob's return, Ethan's concern deepened. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified, with howling winds driving the snow into drifts that would make travel nearly impossible. Madeline's labor progressed relentlessly. The contractions came closer together, each one seeming to drain more of her strength. Between pains, she drifted in and out of awareness, her face pale and damp with sweat despite the room's chill. "Talk to me," she requested during one lucid moment. "Distract me." Ethan, who had been wringing out cool cloths for her forehead, searched for something, anything, to say that might ease her suffering. "When I first came to Montana," he began hesitantly, "I worked for a rancher named Sullivan. Tough old Irishman who'd seen everything the frontier could throw at a man. He told me once that the territory was like a beautiful, dangerous woman. She'd either make you or break you, with no middle ground." A faint smile touched Madeline's lips. "And which did she do to you?" "Both, I think," Ethan admitted. "Broke down whatever softness Texas left in me, then remade me harder, until you came." Her eyes, hazy with pain, focused on him. "Me?" "You," he confirmed, the words coming easier now. "You brought something back that I thought was gone for good, something I didn't even know I was missing." Another contraction seized her before she could respond, this one so intense that her entire body arched with it. When it finally passed, she lay gasping, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. "I'm afraid, Ethan," she whispered, "if something happens." "Nothing will happen," he interrupted fiercely. "You're strong, Madeline. Stronger than anyone I've ever known." "If it does," she insisted, "promise me you'll care for the baby. Don't send it to James or my uncle. Raise it as your own." The request struck Ethan with the force of physical blow. "Don't talk that way. You're going to be fine. You'll raise this child yourself." "Promise me," she repeated, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Please, Ethan." Looking into her desperate eyes, he couldn't refuse. "I promise. But it's a promise I won't need to keep, because you're going to get through this." Relief softened her features. "Thank you," she murmured, before another contraction claimed her attention. As twilight deepened outside the frost-covered windows, Chen appeared at the bedroom door. "Lady need to push soon," he announced. "Baby coming now." Terror and resolve warred in Ethan's chest. With no sign of Dr. Wells or Jacob, it fell to him and Chen to see Madeline through this final, most dangerous stage of birth. The responsibility was overwhelming, but there was no alternative. "Tell me what to do," he said to Chen, rolling up his sleeves. The next hour passed in a blur of urgent activity. Following Chen's calm instructions, Ethan positioned himself to support Madeline as she struggled through the final phase of labor. Her cries had given way to guttural sounds of effort that seemed torn from the very core of her being. "You're doing so well," Ethan encouraged, wiping sweat from her brow between pushes. "So strong, Madeline. Just a little more." "I can't," she sobbed after a particularly difficult effort. "I can't do this." "You can," he insisted, his lips close to her ear. "You survived everything else, Boston, your uncle, the journey west. This is just one more challenge, and you're winning." Something in his words reached her. With renewed determination, Madeline gathered her remaining strength for another push. "Head coming," Chen announced. "One more push, lady." With a final, superhuman effort, Madeline bore down. Ethan felt her entire body tense against his supporting arms, heard her ragged cry of pain and triumph, and then another cry joined hers, thin and indignant. "A boy," Chen declared, lifting a squirming, bloody infant. "Strong boy." Tears blurred Ethan's vision as Chen placed the newborn on Madeline's chest. The child was perfect, tiny fingers, wrinkled face, lungs that worked with impressive vigor as he announced his arrival to the world. "William," Madeline whispered, her exhausted face transformed by wonder as she touched her son's cheek. "Hello, my darling." Watching them together, this woman who had come to mean everything to him, and the child she had brought into the world through sheer determination, Ethan felt something fundamental shift within his chest. The walls he'd built around his heart over years of solitude crumbled completely, leaving him defenseless against the rush of emotion. "He's beautiful," he managed, his voice rough with feeling. "Like his mother." Madeline looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears and something deeper. "Would you like to hold him? After all, he's as much yours as mine now." With trembling hands, Ethan accepted the swaddled infant. The boy weighed almost nothing, yet the responsibility he represented felt immense. As Ethan cradled him awkwardly, the child's cries quieted. Tiny eyes, dark blue and unfocused, seemed to study his face. "Hello, William," he said softly. "Welcome to Broken Arrow Ranch." In that moment, with the storm howling outside and this new life warm against his chest, Ethan Ingram knew he was lost. Whatever arrangement, whatever pretense had brought them to this point no longer mattered. Madeline and her son were his family now, not by blood or legal documentation, but by the deeper bonds of love that he'd denied for so long. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a peace he'd never known. Dr. Wells and Jacob arrived just before midnight, half frozen from their journey through the blizzard. They found the small family gathered around the fire in the main room, Madeline propped up with pillows in Ethan's chair, the baby nursing contentedly at her breast, and Ethan seated beside them, his expression one of exhausted wonder. "I see we missed the main event," Wells observed, stamping snow from his boots. "Mother and child appear to be doing well without my assistance." "Chen was the expert," Ethan said, rising to greet them. "I just followed instructions." The doctor quickly examined both Madeline and the newborn, pronouncing them remarkably healthy given the circumstances. "You did an excellent job, all things considered," he told Ethan. "Not many men could have managed so well in a crisis." "I had no choice," Ethan replied simply. "They needed me." The words encompassed more than just the practical assistance he'd provided. In those desperate hours, something fundamental had changed. Ethan had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The emotional distance he'd maintained for so long had vanished, replaced by an attachment so profound it seemed to have rewritten his very nature. Later, after Wells and Jacob had retired to rest from their ordeal, and Madeline had fallen into exhausted sleep with the baby beside her, Ethan sat alone by the fire, contemplating the transformation of his life in a single day. He had believed the frontier was no place for love. That attachment was a luxury that only invited heartbreak. Yet here he was, irrevocably attached to a woman he'd married for convenience and a child who shared none of his blood. The prospect of losing either had become unthinkable. The question remained, did Madeline feel the same? Her words during labor, asking him to raise her child if the worst happened, suggested trust beyond their arrangement. But trust was not love, and she had never spoken of their future beyond the original terms. Ethan's contemplation was interrupted by a soft cry from the bedroom. Rising quickly to avoid waking Madeline, he found William squirming restlessly beside his sleeping mother. With careful movements, Ethan lifted the swaddled infant, cradling him against his chest as he carried him to the fire. "SHH, little one," he murmured, "your mama needs her rest." To his surprise, the baby quieted almost immediately, tiny fingers curling reflexively around one of his own. The simple gesture of trust from this new life undid something in Ethan's chest. "I don't know much about being a father," he confessed softly to the infant. "Never thought I'd have the chance. But I promise you this, I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of you, to give you the kind of home every child deserves." "You already are," came Madeline's voice from behind him. Ethan turned to find her standing in the bedroom doorway, wrapped in a quilt, her face soft with an emotion he dared not name. "You should be resting," he admonished gently. "I woke when you took him," she explained, moving carefully to join them by the fire. "You're a natural, you know, he's completely content with you." Ethan glanced down at the peaceful infant in his arms. "Probably just the warmth." "No," Madeline said with certainty. "Babies know, they sense safety, protection." She settled into the chair opposite his, watching them together. "Ethan, I need to ask you something important." The seriousness in her tone sent a ripple of apprehension through him. "Of course. When we made our arrangement, it was meant to be temporary. A solution until the danger passed and I could establish myself elsewhere." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But things have changed, haven't they? Between us, I mean." The directness of her question left no room for evasion. Ethan looked into her eyes, seeing the same vulnerability and hope that he felt himself. "Yes," he admitted, "they have. When James came," she continued, "offering to take me back to Boston, did you mean what you implied? That you wouldn't let me go?" Ethan thought carefully before responding. This moment was too important for anything less than complete honesty. "I meant it," he said finally. "The thought of you leaving, of both of you leaving, was unbearable." "Still is." Her eyes filled with tears, though her expression remained steady. "Why?" One word so simple, yet requiring the most difficult answer he'd ever given. Ethan had spent years avoiding emotional entanglements, convincing himself that love was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. Now, facing this woman who had upended every certainty, he found the truth wasn't so complicated after all. "Because I love you," he said simply. I didn't intend to, didn't believe it was possible. But somewhere between that first day when the sheriff brought you here and tonight when you brought our son into the world, you became essential to me. Both of you did. A tear slipped down Madeline's cheek. Our son. If you'll allow it, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. I know he's not mine by blood, but in every way that matters. He is yours, she completed, as am I if you want us. Not as an arrangement or obligation, but as your family. Your real family, Ethan. The word family resonated through him like a church bell, clear and true. Family was what he'd lost in Texas, what he'd convinced himself he didn't need or want. Yet here it was, offered freely by the woman who had come to embody everything good in his life. I want that more than anything, he admitted, but are you certain? This life is hard, isolated. Nothing like what you knew in Boston. Madeline rose carefully, crossing the space between them to stand before his chair. With gentle fingers she touched the baby's downy head, then Ethan's cheek. Boston was my past, she said softly. You and William are my future. This ranch, this life we've begun building, it's more real, more meaningful than anything I left behind. It won't be easy, he warned, even as hope expanded in his chest. The best things rarely are, she replied with a smile. Then, with a directness that had always characterized her approach to life's challenges, I love you, Ethan Ingram, not for your protection or your name, but for the man you are. The man who said, you'll always have a place with me, when I had nowhere else to turn. William stirred between them, making small sounds of contentment. Ethan looked down at the child, their child now, then back to Madeline's expectant face. I meant those words then, he said, but they mean something different now, something deeper. With his free arm, he drew her carefully closer. You'll always have a place with me, Madeline. Not just shelter or protection, but here. He pressed her hand against his heart, for as long as you want it. Forever then, she whispered, leaning down to press her lips gently to his. The kiss was tender, reverent, an affirmation rather than a beginning. When they parted, Ethan saw in Madeline's eyes the same certainty he felt in his soul. What had started as an arrangement of necessity had transformed into something neither could have anticipated. A love strong enough to defy convention, overcome doubt, and build a family where none had existed before. Outside, the Montana winter raged on, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. But within the walls of the ranch house, warmth prevailed. The warmth of a family forged not by blood or birth, but by choice and love and the courage to believe in both. For Ethan Ingram, who had once believed the frontier was no place for tender feelings, this revelation was the greatest journey of all. The West hadn't broken his heart as he'd feared. Instead, through Madeline, it had finally made it whole.